So here's a question for you. How good of a fig barfer are you? Hi, I'm Tom Bray since 1954. And yes, fig barfer. That's a word I haven't heard in terms of Lego before. I had to look that one up. You all may know what it means. I didn't know what it means, and apparently there are different meanings to it. One of the chief things it means is just collecting a group of minifigs in a kind of certain arrangement and for any purpose whatsoever. In other words, they don't have to be the same theme. They don't have to be stuff that you've made up. They're just a group of minifigs collected in a certain way. And apparently the term was a pejorative at first from haters of minifigs. But I encountered this term fig barfing because one of my loyal viewers of my YouTube channel since 1954 left the comment that he thought I could do a better job of fig barfing my original factions that I was creating for my fantasy castle world. And so what I took that to mean was the gathering of different pieces from different minifigs in order to customize my faction that I was building. And I think that was a valid criticism. I don't use very much detail as of yet in the creation of my my original factions. I tend to just change out one or two elements and write a lore around it. And I haven't been doing that for very long, creating original factions. And I imagine that eventually I may get around to changing out details as detailed as the color of the gloves. But, for now, I just have to be honest. I like to create factions in a different way. My focus is not so much on gathering the absolute most unique pieces from everywhere and creating something that's absolutely brand new, so much as it is reassigning meaning to the figure that exists as it is. So, for example, if I were to take the elf bard from the Dungeons and Dragons series, sure, I'm sure that within Dungeons and Dragons, the elf bard has a particular meaning and it has a purpose of its own within the context of that game. I don't know anything about the game, so I completely ignore that. I come up with a lore for that figure based upon my imagination and what I think that figure does within my fantasy kingdom. So in other words, if I were to change something about that figure, say, put a different cape on it or have it holding something else, I might create a completely different meaning for that figure. And will it be entirely different than the original figure out of the box? No, it might be very similar to the figure out of the box. But to me, the fun is in building the lore and not so much in customizing the absolute uniqueness of the look of the character. And I guess that's my point, is that I'm much more into lore. And so today I wanted to talk about that because, my background is as an actor. I started as an actor way back in the 1970s. First on stage, and then I came west to do television and got my first television series and did some movies. And then in 1989, I switched to writing, and I wrote mostly television, including, half-hour sitcoms for network and hour dramas as well. So I have a background in both, and I've been teaching that kind of screenwriting at a local university here for almost 20 years. Along the way, I was also a middle school drama teacher, but that's another story. But in other words, story is a big deal to me. And one of the reasons I kind of love Lego and fell in love with the fantasy castle element of Lego was because it's really about story. Fantasy castle, because it can be whatever you want it to be. And, and I almost love the fact, even though I complain all the time about it, I almost love the fact that Lego does not have a castle faction, especially a fantasy castle faction of sets that they're actively releasing right now, because they could if they wanted to, and there would be lots of them things to choose from. But what it does is it forces us, who have our own fantasy castle worlds, to be creative and to either modify something that exists from another series, set series, or create original creations, to complete mocks. For example, in my video this week over and since 1954, I modify a Harry Potter set to become a castle fortress tomb of a vampire that I call the Old One. So I completely modified that set, and in not a great amount of detail, but enough detail that it became what I needed it to become for my lore. And that took imagination. I mean, I could have, if Lego was putting out a fantasy castle series, I could probably have grabbed one of their buildings off the shelf, and it would have fit, very well for what I was trying to do. But instead, I had to be creative. It's the same with the Ninjago set that I added to my fantasy kingdom and made it the headquarters of the medieval green dragon that Lego just put out, that I call Nograd the Emperor Dragon in my lore. So, I was forced to be creative there. And by the way, I guess my point is, in that Ninjago set that I just referred to, I did not really change one thing about that set. That set is out of the box, basically. What I did was apply a frame to it. I applied a frame story to it, and that story was that it was the headquarters of Nograd the Mighty, the Dragon Emperor. And aesthetically, it fits that beautifully. Aesthetically, I've made it fit within my traditional castle realm with, traditional Lego castles surrounding it. So that's what I'm talking about when I'm talking about customizing figures and creating new factions. When I created the faction from the Land of Oz, which I imagined, I used the steampunk inventor, which is from Series 27. And I changed very little about the ambassador, who is basically I made him the steampunk inventor. I put a vial of green liquid in his hand as something magical, and I rearranged the thing it was carrying a little bit. But the way I changed the figure from the steampunk inventor to the clockwork, meaning mechanical, ambassador from Oz, was I changed the story. And poof, all of a sudden, a character that meant one thing means now another thing. I think that's very exciting. And I'm not a snob about other people actually, changing the gloves of a character if that's what they want to do and that's exciting to them. More power to you. I think there are some folks out there who are doing absolutely wonderful modifications when it comes to building original factions. And they are fig barfing in a great way. I mean, my buddy Rio and his channel, and I'll leave a link to that. He's a fellow Oregonian here. I don't think there's anybody that does better mods of figures every week on his channel, just about, than he does. They're absolutely spectacular. He has a real talent for it, and my Lego hat is off to him in my admiration for the kind of stuff that he creates. But what my jam is, if you will, is the story. And so I'm more excited about taking something out of the box and doing virtually nothing to it and creating a new story around it than I am about actually modifying the gloves or changing the torso or putting those pieces together. I think that's great and that's fun, and I would like to be able to do that, and we'll practice doing it. but I don't really know enough yet. I mean, a guy like Rio really knows his Lego sets, and he knows the minifigs. And so he knows exactly where every piece comes from when he tricks something out. I don't really have that information. I would be taking just pieces blindly and putting them together, which would be great. But I wouldn't be able to tell you where those pieces came from. But I can tell you a character out of the box that I change a story on becomes living and real to me, and I find absolutely nothing wrong with that. So to take this a step further, my steampunk inventor who became my Oz ambassador, Clockwork ambassador, had some guards that came with him. And all I really did there was I put a green rod in their hand to signify some magic that they brought from Oz. And I also changed out the wig from a Ninjago wig that had an emerald kind of band on it. That's all I did. But I created a story around that figure that was really exciting to me. And so that's what I'm talking about when I'm talking about the way that I approach lore and incorporating things into my world. It all depends upon the story that I can build around that. So with that in mind, I'd like to just tell you a little bit about how I go about my lore building and tell you a little bit about the story structure that I always have in my mind because of my experience as a television writer. So first of all, I guess I should tell you just very briefly an overview of television script structure as I learned it when I was coming up and writing on different shows. Now, certain writers do it differently. A lot of this I learned by synthesis. Most of it I learned by synthesis, meaning I osmosis the lessons I was learning from my showrunners when I worked on shows. But I also had to teach this for almost 20 years, and so I had to find a way to distill what I was actually doing and what I was reading, watching, and writing into a methodology that I could use to teach this. And so I came up with this methodology and this structure that I used to teach how to write for television. That is a basic synthesis of the kinds of things that I learned when I was writing in a room. And so let's look at sitcom and our television, broadcast television structure. Both of these structures have 6 parts. Let's look at our dramatic television first. It has 6 parts. It has 4 acts, but it also has a teaser, which is the kind of introduction that grabs you into a show, and a tag, that kind of thing at the end that resolves. And then it has Act 1, 2, 3, and 4. And they all kind of follow a similar structure. And they all most stories revolve around a problem. And so here's how it works. There's 6 beats to a problem. And those beats are assigned to the different sections of an hour script. For example, the teaser has a section that involves action where the story problem is introduced. So here are the 6 beats of a story problem being developed. The problem's introduced. Beat 2, the problem becomes complicated. Beat 3, the problem explodes or reaches its highest point of jeopardy. And that's usually when the act break happens. So in our TV, that's after Act 2, like a half hour in. In sitcom, that is after Act 1, because there's 2 acts in a sitcom, because most sitcoms are half hour. Now, Act 3, or the next beat, the 4th beat, is the what to do. The what to do beat is how are we going to fix the problem that's exploded. And within that beat, a plan is created to how to fix it. And that's brought into beat 5. Now, in an hour dramatic show, beat 5 is what we would call the high action sequence. In a sitcom, it's the high comedy scene. And then in beat 6, there's a resolution of some kind. So that's really it. And it works. That 6-beat structure works for both half-hour comedy and hour drama. So again, problem introduced, problem complicated, problem explodes, what to do, meaning a plan is put into place, and then a high action or high comedy scene, and then a resolution. So I have that kind of ingrained in me as a kind of a story structure. And so understanding that lore building for YouTube videos in the Lego world are really, story serials, in that the story continues from week to week, like the old serials used to. When my father was a boy, he would go to the movies every Saturday and see the next installment of, something like, Flash Gordon or something, where every week was kind of a cliffhanger. Old radio was like that too. TV has an element of that, in that there's continuing storylines that continue, and each episode may end on a cliffhanger. In old television, the television I was raised in, there really were no continuing storylines, unless it was a two-part episode. So if you think of the original Star Trek, most of those episodes resolved in the same episode. So you could tune in week to week, and you wouldn't really need to know what happened the previous week to understand what was going on in that week's story. There was a problem, and it worked through all those beats, and then it resolved, and that was the end of it. But with a YouTube video lore, you kind of have to keep things going. So what I tend to do is to introduce many different problems as I'm building out my lore. And then I just kind of work through the beats of each of those problems, from, video to video to video, until I resolve one or introduce a new one. And continue on with the one that it seems to be the most interesting. Let the other ones die in the background for a while, and then bring them back. So you constantly have a series of story problems that are rising and falling in various stages of development. So, for example, right now, what I have going in my story of Nograd the Mighty. And by the way, this is lore that I've just kind of started to introduce, because my channel's very new. But when I introduced it and started and decided, hey, people really like these little lore videos at the beginning, I decided I'm going to do a standard story. I then week to week began developing these stories in the structure that I know, which is television structure. And so that's what I'm doing week to week, is I'm introducing problems, new problems, or I'm developing the story problems that I've introduced the previous week, as I would if I were writing a television show with a lot of continuing storylines. So, for example, the storyline of the shapeshifter in my lore, that's kind of receded into the background right now. The shapeshifter has escaped into the forest. He was sent by Emperor Nograd to kidnap the King Cuthbert, but he's escaped. So that story can die out for a while. I've elevated the story of the rivalry between the vampire faction and the dragon paladins to the point where there's going to be a duel. I have elevated a story and let it fall into the background of King Cuthbert's new Praetorian Guard, which is a figure that I created off of the Cupid figure from miniseries 27. And they're the Hearts Guard. And when I created that faction, I wanted to create some lore around it. But that lore has kind of died off with the threat of the shapeshifter being placed into the background. Now, that story, I'm sure, will reemerge. This week, I introduced a new problem, and that is the old one, the oldest of the vampires, has risen from his tomb and will be set out upon the world to wreak havoc. So that's a new problem that's being introduced into the kingdom. Now, I tend to create these story problems around the Lego that I'm building or the factions that I'm creating. But I am using a story structure. It's not exact. It's not, I don't have to write, 46 pages, like I would for an hour television show, or 52 pages, but it's enough that I need to develop each story problem as I present it, and let it rise and fall as my interest rises and falls in it. That's basically a very simple story structure that can be used. It's a story. Now, there's more to it when you write for television. There's character-based stuff, and there's genre-based stuff that you got to attend to. For example, there are rules if you're writing a cop show or any sort of crime show. There are rules that you have to have a crime. That seems obvious, doesn't it? And you have to, and you have a clue trail that leads to the solution of the crime. In science fiction, there are other rules. When you're building out your world, you have to be clear, I think, with your audience about the rules of your world. So that goes into it too. I mean, they have to understand what's kind of going on. So you have to know kind of instinctually with experience how much your audience needs to know and how much they don't need to know about the world building that you're creating. So there are character elements that you attend to when you're writing a television show that I'm not so much concerned with when I'm writing Lego lore. I'm focusing on story problems and introducing them and letting the story problem take me where it will. That's basically what my lore creating is. And that's basically what excites me about doing it for my Lego world. And that's what excites me about building Lego in general. Again, it's the story. I'm really, really excited about telling stories. And as you can tell, I like to talk. And I'm really excited about the idea of creating lore that fits what I've either built that week or a character that I've created that week. And again, just to reiterate, I'm less concerned about a totally unique minifig as I am in taking a minifig that even exists and not changing anything, although I do like to change something. But, I could take a Star Wars character out of the box and fit it into my castle lore just by creating the lore around that character and an explanation for why it looks. And to me, that's the most exciting thing of all, is taking something and changing it just by changing the story of it. That, I think, is really something that excites me and something that keeps me excited about the Lego hobby from week to week. How about you? What do you do in the creation of your lore? How do you go about it? If you even have lore that you create, what's your criteria for, fig barfing? Great word, great new word that I've learned. A character, and how do you go about it? If you're watching this on YouTube or listening on YouTube, leave me a comment, because I'd really love to know what your thoughts are on this. And if you're listening in a traditional podcast way, you can email me at since1954podcast@gmail.com, and I'd be happy to get your comment that way. But until next time, thank you for joining me. Thank you for your support. And really happy fig barfing. Thank you. I'm very excited about that. Bye-bye.